welcome to another episode of It Stinks, the Critic podcast. I'm your host, Brian Rubinow. Today we'll be discussing Season 1, Episode 5, A Little Deb Will Do Ya. And joining me to discuss this episode, a good friend of mine, a very funny gentleman. Please welcome comedian Ethan Stanislawski.
Hey, how's it going, Brian? Good to see you on a screen.
Yeah, good to see you too. Yeah, I can't actually remember the last time I saw you in person, but pretty sure it was probably at the Pack Theater.
Yeah, I think it was actually when I handed you my keytar. Or you handed you your keytar, because I had used it for a sketch with my sketch team, and but I used it a year before, and I had forgotten to give it to you back for over a year, and then we used it for another sketch, and I'm like, Brian's going to be there, so I'll hand him a keytar.
That's right. I remember that. Yeah, my keytar that was actually for Rock Band 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do miss that game, but but yeah, that's why I didn't exactly need it back, because it's like, yeah, not a lot of plastic instruments taking up room in my house anymore.
Yeah, I was like, if it was an urgent matter, you would have gotten it back much sooner. But it was not. Of the things that are urgent, fake keytars for video games, probably not as high as like non-perishables. But
right. Well, I'm glad you were able to get some use out of it.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're here to discuss The Critic. I remember you told me you were a big fan of this show. So
I adore this show. It is. I'm an insane Simpsons nerd, and this is the only show for me that I would consider topping The Simpsons. It's the same staff, so it's kind of a cheat, and it was only on for like but it's also like, as a film nerd, as someone from New York, it's like, oh, it just covers everything.
Yeah. So you watched it when it was originally on in the 90s?
Nope. When I first saw the Simpsons episode where Jay Sherman was on, there were definitely some jokes I didn't get because I didn't know there was a show called The Critic. But it was my favorite episode of The Simpsons, the one with Jay Sherman, even before I knew it was a crossover episode. I just love that episode. I love the movie stuff. I think I became aware of it in high school, but it wasn't until college someone got the DVDs for it, and then I watched them all, and I'm like, holy crap, this is perfect. And I sort of Wikipedia the history of it beforehand, but then I finally saw it. I'm like, this is everything I love. But it is interesting to watch a show. You're like, how much can they shit on one human being and it still is funny? Like,
yeah, Jay does certainly get shit on a lot in this show. It's just
the whole show's premise is you're a fat, awful, mean piece of shit. That's the whole premise of that show.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And also, you are a native New Yorker, right?
Mm-hmm. That is true. Born and raised.
Yeah, so I've talked about this with other guests a little bit on the show, but I'd love to get your feeling on it. Just, since New York is so central to this show, how do you feel The Critic kind of portrays New York?
I think it's interesting because it's also New York in the 90s, which I remember. I feel like what New York was even in the 90s, certainly like compared to before I was born, is very different than it is now. Like, I go back now, I don't recognize pretty much anything, but it definitely captures the feel of how that city felt in the 90s. I feel like it reminds me of my childhood in that city. And it makes sense because it's from when I was like 8 or 9 and a child in New York City. The school where Jay sends Bobby is actually the school my high school girlfriend went to for elementary, middle school, the United Nations school. So
wait, that's a real school?
Yeah, the UNIS. It's United Nations International. I mean, it's not the exact same name, but it's essentially that school.
It's like a parody of it.
Yeah, it's like there's no like kids from Chile with whatever I forget what those stones are.
The Easter Island kids.
Easter Island kids. They don't have the face. Yeah, that's not real, but they are like, it's a very. But the thing that, as someone who grew up, especially in the New York City private school circuit in the 90s, the sign on that school is promoting brotherhood and tolerance for those who can afford it. And I saw that. I'm like, that is every school. That's everyone I grew up with. That's the premise of every private school in New York.
I mean, I totally got that was a joke at the expense of private schools, because I also went to a private middle and high school out here in LA. But like, yeah, I totally didn't know that there's an actual United Nations school. I just watching that, I just figured, okay, I guess the United Nations is in New York, so they're gonna joke about that.
No, they have a school there. My high school girlfriend's mother was the librarian there. Like it's insane.
Wow.
So it definitely, and it gets like, there's just little, I can't really pick one, but like when they have the Pulitzer Awards, it's like at Columbia, I'm like, yep, that's fair. And even like what was considered acceptable in the 90s Woody Allen jokes are very like what I grew up with, like when Woody Allen was like the relevance he had then. And it's different, but it's like, because that story was still fresh, so they were shitting on him in a way that now even weirdly seems more appropriate, because it's like that was still on people's minds, and then it sort of, people forgot about it for like 25 years, and then it came back. So it's like, it weirdly feels more fresh in terms of that.
Yeah, because this show is, of course, pre-Me Too movement, but like, yeah, everyone still kind of knew Woody Allen had these weird sexual proclivities. Like he was married to Soon Yi when this show was on.
I don't even. Oh, sorry. Go on.
Oh yeah, and just like, yeah, I mean, the show mocks him, but it feels like kind of good-natured ribbing. Like it doesn't really feel like they're like coming down on him too hard.
There's like moments where you're like, it's subtle, where it's like, Sun Yi, I swear I didn't know she was your sister. You hear that, and you're like, oh my God, that's a fucking cutting blow. But it's not presented necessarily as like, fuck you, but it is like, that is really incendiary in its own way. But there are still moments like where it just like, he'll do like his physical stick walking off a scene, things like that. But it was, I don't know. I don't want to talk about Woody Allen too much on a show about Critic. But it just in general, it just felt like my childhood in New York. And it really, and just there's a joke in the pilot where he gets in a cab and talks to the cab driver, and he says, read the sign, and then pulls down and says, driver only speaks 3 words of English. And I'm like, that's perfect. It's very, it definitely felt like my childhood, just the vibe of it. And so that's really, like Seinfeld and Friends, they're all there, but I feel like that show captures like the sass of New York, not necessarily the feel of New York, but it just captures like how the sass of that culture there than almost anything I've ever seen.
And is that sass like still there today? Like you mentioned, New York is like very different.
I don't know what New York is anymore. Like it's like, I think there's less camaraderie, but like the harshness is still there, but there's less like moments where like that was a fun. I mean, it's different because like living there is very different from visiting there. So like when I go back now, I visit, I'm like, oh, this is fun to visit New York for like a week. But when I was living there, like that kind of bullshit is every day and it weighs on you. But now it's like I go back and like none of the stores or places I grew up with are there anymore. And like even in the nice parts of the area, all the buildings are boarded up because no one can afford rent, even in like the nice parts of the city, even the stores. So like go to the Upper East Side, and like, which is normally in that show's universe would be filled with a bunch of whatever, but now it's just like half every block something's boarded up, and even in a nice area, just because people can't, the rent is so out of line with what is realistic.
Wow. Well, I mean, that sounds like it has something in common with LA, because of course the rent here is completely out of control.
It's everywhere. I feel like San Francisco, it's the worst. Like,
oh yeah.
It's really, but like, it's also, when I grew up in New York was interesting because even then people were like, New York's dying compared to what it was like in the 70s. So I grew up, I don't remember, like I remember the election where Giuliani won the first time, but I don't really remember New York before Giuliani. But I remember all the shit Giuliani did as mayor. That was like my childhood. Like I'm 33, so like I always say with New York, like, where I grew up near Columbia, which is like on the border of the really nice Upper West Side in Harlem. So it's like in this sort of called Morningside Heights. It's this weird zone where it's like it's sort of like you see both sides. It's how both halves live, kind of in a weird way.
Okay.
And like when I was growing up, there's a playground across the street, and my dad would never let me play in the sand pit there, and I was mad that he wouldn't let me do it. But then I found out as I got older, it was full of crack vials. Like that was just
oh shit.
The playground across the street from me in 1989, and now it's like the nicest, cleanest like thing. So it's like, what's the options? Either you have the shit or the overdoing it the other way.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But
So
it's a different side. But like, I felt like that world is still there, and even the show captures like that transition as it's happening in sort of weird, subtle ways.
okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, yeah, not. I've never lived in New York, so yeah, I'm totally clueless about any of that. So that's why, yeah, it's good to get that perspective.
Yeah.
Cool. So, how about we get into this week's episode? A Little Deb Will Do Ya. So I'll just give the synopsis here. Eleanor forces Margot to attend a debutante ball to which Jay accompanies her. Meanwhile, Jay's show is losing viewers to a children's show called Humphrey the Hippo.
With his hit rap single, Hug the Police.
Yeah, Hug the Police. Yeah. One of the jokes in the Critic that is definitely still relevant. A lot of the jokes are very of the time. They're very 90s, but whenever they joke about like police violence or like the gun culture, you still feel that.
Yeah. I've never went to a debutante's ball. My best friend from high school went to one. Someone like a friend from college, sister, and from the way she described it, it's like, oh yeah, it's exactly that, like that kind of ridiculousness.
Wow.
Yeah, it's more just like teenage girls like melting down and being like insanely competitive over boys, but also just gross, like over the top, like money being spent on bullshit, and it's just like
Yeah, well, I've never been to a debutante ball, and I still don't. I still feel like I don't really understand what the purpose of it is. Like, are these girls like looking for potential future husbands, or
it's kind of like to show off that you are an adult woman now, and boys should be lining up for you, for your attention, and that's really the premise of it, which is disgusting.
Yeah, it feels very gross.
Which is even in 1994 or 5, that was a disgusting concept. And so Margot's like the only voice of reason in that whole show. She's like what Adam Scott is in everything. She's the only human being in that show. And she is, I think having her perspective it was good that there was a Margot specific episode, because
though we'll get into this more later, but I feel like at the end of the episode, I don't feel like Margot wins.
No,
so I don't know where the show sides with. I don't know if they're on Margot's side or not, but
it's interesting. It did take a little bit of a turn at the end, but I was okay with what it did. It was just like, but yeah,
it was a little weird.
I say I love Margot for being the most grounded person, yet Franklin's by far my favorite character on the show.
Oh,
who is the least grounded character maybe in anything.
Oh yeah, I've said that on this show. I love Franklin. He's probably my favorite.
Yeah. There's also no Jeremy in this episode. That was an interesting thing to watch. Jeremy is nowhere in this episode.
Oh yeah, the Australian hunk Jeremy Hawk. Yeah, totally absent, because I guess we focus mostly on just Jay's family in this episode. So I guess to kind of backtrack a little bit, to start at the beginning, Eleanor, the mother, kind of has to convince Margot to take part in this debutante ball. Part of that is we get this fun little video from like 1953 of when Eleanor was in a debutante ball.
With an Ethel Rosenberg reference.
Yes, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg get the chair. And then at the ball, she dances with Bob Fosse, which was pretty fun. That was
amazing. I think it was Audrey Hepburn, what an Oscar. The moment that made me laugh was Ethel Rosenberg got the chair. Some pretty dark jokes in this episode.
Yeah. Most of them I think have to do with Eleanor, because after the video does nothing to convince Margot, she resorts to threatening to shoot Margot's horse.
Yeah, I was like, it's interesting that a show would take that turn. I mean, in general, she didn't kill the horse, so that's good.
Yeah.
But even the threat of that is wow. And it makes Eleanor, I think that's the least redeeming Eleanor was on the show. I mean, she's ridiculous in like her upper crusty ways, but that was the moment where I'm like, oh, she's this committed to this, and this is actually terrible.
Yeah, like that whole moment or like that scene, left me with a very weird feeling because like they're not playing it for laughs, they're playing it straight pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much.
And if that's the case, it's just a really weird, dark direction to go.
The only joke in that sequence is when she's counting down.
On the count of 4.
Stop!
1.
Jay, do something!
2.
Should I jump on the horse and ride it away?
It'd be less cruel to shoot it. 3.
But that's like in the middle of the most intense moment. It's like so it breaks up this very intense moment with a joke, but it does you don't even notice the joke really because you're like, oh shit, they're gonna shoot a horse.
Yeah, and it's like, well, that's yet another joke at the expense of Jay's size, which.
Yes.
By this point, it's only the 5th episode, but we've probably had 100 of those already.
Exactly. It's in the intro credits. It's like literally like 3 times in the intro credits.
But luckily, she doesn't shoot the horse. Margot relents, and she's like, "Yeah, fine, I'll do it."
Yeah.
And that closes Act 1. Beginning of Act 2, we get sort of the B plot of this episode, and I think this is the first one with like a real A and B story to it.
That's a good point. There's not really subplots in the other ones that I can think of. Yeah, because the first one it's mostly about like this is the 5th episode, and I pretty much know all the others. My favorite episode is the Misery one, and that's like one plot throughout. The pilot's amazing. That's pretty much one plot throughout. The one where he insults his mother is again. There's no real B plot there. And I think I think they sort of realized, oh shit, we gotta get some B plots going at a certain point. Make these other characters so like this episode was a Margot heavy episode. The episode before was an Eleanor heavy episode. So I think they're like doing what every show does, or like we have to flesh out our side characters when we got such a force of nature behind our lead character. So we've got to even it out.
Yeah, well, I've definitely noted it before on this podcast, but like I feel like plot is not really this show's strong suit.
No.
Their strong suit is jokes.
Oh my
god. So I'm kind of willing to overlook the fact that they don't have a lot of B plots because who cares? Like I know you and I, we're both comedians, we're both writers, so maybe we care about that sort of thing, but in general doesn't matter at all.
You're paying attention. You're captivated by the whole thing, and I think it's maybe some of the strongest joke writing, just pure joke writing I've ever seen in a comedy show.
Oh yeah. So as Act 2 begins, we get introduced to the B story, which is that Jay is losing viewers to something called Humphrey the Hippo, a children's show starring a person in a green hippo costume that sings and dances and entertains children.
Which is just a completely original idea. There's no parody. Yeah. It's not based on any children's show in the 90s at all.
Yeah, so obvious ripoff of Barney the Purple Dinosaur, which I don't know, I guess people our age would probably remember that, but I don't know. Kids growing up today, probably not.
Definitely not. I have to ask my brother and sister because they're my younger brother and sister are twins. They're 5 years younger than me. I don't know if they know Barney, even though I was sort of. They probably do. It was probably more their age range, but they probably oh yeah, Barney. That's sort of the thought. But it was a phenomenon at the time. It was.
Oh yeah.
It's hard to explain how everywhere you went was Barney. Everyone saying "I love you, you love me." It was almost bigger than Sesame Street at its peak, I would say. Oh yeah, it was absolutely huge, and most things that get that popular, it was a very popular target for mockery. Yeah, I'm sure all the late night shows at the time had Barney jokes and Simpsons had Barney jokes. Pretty much everyone who was making fun of anything had Barney jokes at the time. Oh, yeah. And just a quick sidebar. I actually have a book published in 1996 called Cyber Jokes, the funniest stuff from the internet.
which is
That's a relic. That's a collector's item.
I know. I love it so
You
much.
sell that for like $5,000.
So yes, someone in 1996 thought it would be a good idea to get a bunch of things that were funny on the internet and print them in a physical book.
It's 1996, so sure, why not?
And there's just a lot of anti-Barney humor in there. It's like a lot of jokes about Barney, a lot of jokes about Windows 95.
Yeah, there was definitely someone in a AOL message board I was in made like this weird joke MIDI file that had them killing Barney as he was singing "I Love You, You Love Me." So
of course.
That's very 90s.
I remember one of the very first Flash games I ever played was where you could like kill Barney with like.
Is that like E-Bombs World or some?
This was before E-Bombs World. This was just like
Newgrounds. Oh, what? I haven't thought about Newgrounds in 20 years.
It may have been Newgrounds. It could have been just some random independent website where.
Yeah.
There's basically you just get a picture of Barney, and then you just click on it, and it eventually just gets bloodier and bloodier. Yeah.
Those were the days when you could murder people on the internet and viciously in like a way that now is like horribly cruel. And it's like, oh, we're 13. Why not?
Yeah. Yeah. So Jay is losing viewers to Humphrey the Hippo. Duke Phillips is trying to get him to, of course, change his show to kind of get more viewers in. And we get in this scene between Duke and Jay, I think one of the best gags in the entire show, where basically Duke pokes Jay like the Pillsbury Doughboy.
The Pillsbury Doughboy. And it happens like 3 or 4 times, right?
Don't. I find that so demeaning. Hey, look, the Doughboy and I happen to be ticklish in the same spot, but that doesn't give you the right to...
Yeah, and it gets called back at the end, too.
Yeah.
Definitely one of the gags I remembered years later, thinking back on this show. So great.
And it was so obvious. It's like, how did it take 5 episodes for that to happen? Do people still remember what Ted Turner was like at that time?
I mean, I definitely had no idea at the time, like who Ted Turner was, but like, yeah, you know, the billionaire TV executive, created CNN, created TBS, the Superstation.
He's TNT. He was like the 90s Mark Cuban, basically. Like he was the crazy billionaire who like was outspoken and loud, and like I even remember that he was married to Jane Fonda. I weirdly remember when they got divorced, the New York Post headline was "Ted not Fonda Jane." I just remember seeing that, and I'm like, all right, New York Post. But like, yeah, but that was another one. Like every late night talk show had like a Ted Turner joke or something like that. Like Conan was doing Ted Turner jokes till like 8 years ago. Like not that. He was Ted Turner was like 90s Richard Branson, Mark Cuban, basically.
Yeah. And if you ever watch Gremlins 2, the new batch, there's a character in that movie that is basically a mashup of Ted Turner and Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I forget his first name, but his last name is Clamp. And he is a TV executive and a real estate mogul somehow. So
you can be both. You're billionaires. What's the difference?
Yeah, it's not like any rules apply to them of what they can and can't do. But yeah, Gremlins 2, wonderful movie.
Yes, very much yes. Joe Dante is a genius.
All right, so back at the Wigglesworth household, which I think in this episode, do we learn that their last name is Wigglesworth? Because I don't remember it.
I don't know if it's their name or if it's. I think it's Franklin Sherman. I think it's her maiden name.
Oh,
because that's like Eleanor Wigglesworth is in the intro.
Oh,
so
that's
I think
right.
That's her maiden name. It's still Franklin Sherman. Also, their names are Franklin and Eleanor, which is like so obvious that everyone's like but everyone always misses that their names are Franklin and Eleanor.
Yeah, and they basically kind of look like Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt.
And they kind of sound like them too.
Like, they have that upper class like accent.
Yeah. But what comes out of their mouths is the opposite.
Yeah. So at the house, Margot is getting fitted for her dress, and we get this dressmaker who kind of feels like a coded gay stereotype.
Yeah, very much.
You know what? I'm just not going to touch that. Yeah, luckily, I think he's just in that one scene.
Yeah, but there is that Hussy White line that I feel like is a great joke.
That is one of my favorite jokes in this episode, where he's like serious that like,
we dressmakers have a very strict code, so I need to know, do you deserve to wear virginal white?
Yes. Except for the gloves.
oh god,
Yeah, that is
so
a
good.
wonderful joke, and it's like, man, they got away with that. Was like interesting. They got away with that because shit was weird in the 90s, but but it was great.
I guess it was just coded enough that yeah.
I also, every time I think of, it also reminded me of the Simpsons joke, Millhouse doesn't count. When they're talking about wearing white at Lisa's wedding, Millhouse doesn't count.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a lot of moments where you're like, hey, I don't know if it's recycle is the right word, but there's like, oh, this joke was very much in the Critic before it was in The Simpsons, or around the same time as this same joke was in The Simpsons.
Oh, see, I never considered like which one came first, but I definitely noted that, yeah, they do have a lot of similar jokes sometimes. Like, especially just comparing Jay to like Homer Simpson.
Yeah.
The way that weight is always a punchline. And
there is one line. It's I think it's in the season 2 of the Critic that is directly used in the Simpsons. It's when they're doing the Graduate parody, and Franklin's character goes, "They call them fingers, but I've never seen them fing," which is that is a line in the Critic in like 1995 that was later used in like 2002 in the Simpsons episodes, and like when they're just in the pot episode of the Simpsons.
Oh God, I remember that. Wow.
Yeah. I remember that. I've watched the show a lot. I don't know if you can tell.
No, that's great. Cool. So we also meet the boy that Eleanor has picked out to take Margot to the dance, Reeve Winthrop the 14th.
Tell me, Reeve, what's 7 times 8?
13?
Sharp as a tack.
An inbred British doofus, I guess. That, yeah, I guess they're, poking fun at, I guess, like the British royal family, or just like...
Just general royal inbreeding.
Yeah.
It reminds me, this is a very specific reference, technically 90s, but not at all related. But it's the graphic novel Preacher. They had a character that was like the bloodline of Christ that they kept preserving through like 2,000 years. And then so they didn't want to taint it, so they kept inbreeding from Jesus's ancestors for 2,000 years. And he comes out as this like horribly, like mentally challenged, like mutated mess, but he's the future who will redeem the earth. And so that's like, so it just reminded me of that a little bit in terms of like, how inbred are you? Just like,
yeah, I haven't read Preacher. I've read very few graphic novels, but but that's funny that the descendant of Jesus becomes so inbred that he's like, barely functional as a human.
Yeah, basically. And they in the show Preacher, they did that too, but it was just such like a reveal. And when I read I didn't read many graphic novels either in high school, but that was one of the ones I read, and that stayed with me forever.
Nice. And then there's a great line when like Eleanor is talking to Franklin.
I was just going to give you some rubber bands to play with, but if you want to, you can come.
Oh, I could have had rubber bands.
Favorite Franklin line of the episode right there. So great. Yeah, well, why don't we skip ahead, I guess, to the actual dance. So it's at a natural history museum. The
Natural History Museum in New York.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just called the Natural History Museum?
I think it's the National it's like the National Museum of History or something like that. But in New York, it's just the Natural History Museum. That's what you call it.
Okay. Yeah. My senior prom was at the Skirball Museum here in LA.
Yeah.
I don't know why museums are such popular venues for dances.
I don't either. It's more for like galas. I think it's a gala. Mm-hmm. There's dancing, but this is like debutantes are probably less considered a more gala than dance. That's kind of thing. So, but there were like, there's always like receptions there, like fundraisers and shit like that. Like but natural history, it's a lot of that's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but Natural History Museum I think it would less likely be a debutante's ball place to do that in New York, but for setting up jokes, which is there's a couple of great jokes with Jay as the caveman and Franklin talking to the penguins and stuff like that, which are two quality having a board meeting with the penguins and not realizing they're penguins as a Franklin. It's a great Franklin moment.
Yeah, and really what this show does well is just those really quick, like one line, just like throwaway jokes, like years before like Family Guy did it. Yeah. So once we're at the ball, Jay meets a woman who immediately seems very interested in him, which is also kind of a recurring pattern in this show. Jay somehow being able to hook up with women that are like way more attractive than him.
I love Eleanor's line. I just hope she sleeps with him before she kills him.
Yeah. Like comparing her to a Black Widow, I guess, or a like a praying mantis.
Or the woman from the Misery episode, like 2 episodes earlier. It's not an unprecedented thing for his character, even in the 5th episode of the show.
That's true. But yeah, it felt like we have that same sort of plot in the pilot as well of Jay, you know, briefly dating a way more attractive woman before she inevitably leaves him. Like, it almost feels like they were kind of establishing like a girlfriend of the week sort of pattern.
Almost, yeah. I think that was something, I mean, like, that was going around. Like, how attractive was George Costanza, but he had a girlfriend of the week situation.
Exactly. Like, yeah, it's a very Seinfeld kind of thing, or like, I guess maybe it was just like a 90s sitcom thing in general.
I think so. Yeah. So though they do, even in that, they always find ways to make jokes about how fucking weird and like weird the people who are attracted to JR. Like there's a moment in I think it's an earlier episode where he's reading a love letter he receives, and he is like, I mean, you may have mentioned this in a previous episode, but it's like, I am currently convicted, and he just throws in the pile of love letters from cons, and like, that's like, so even in this world that he somehow gets women, they establish that he's like a weird kink of a human being in a lot of ways.
I mean, were the 90s just a hornier decade than today?
Well, that may change given the circumstances of today, but I think there was more of a sense that, to the credit of now, that men could somehow land women through means that were probably not either realistic or great for women. If I'm intelligent, that's enough. Which is, I mean, intelligence is good, but I don't know if that's enough, you know?
Yeah, like if you grew up in the 90s and you watched a lot of rom-coms or just any sort of love story in the 90s, you would definitely come away with the impression that like women were the prize or like the goal, that like you put in the work and you're rewarded with a woman.
It was a level up in a video game to get a woman. Like, literally in The Sims, which I guess is not 90s, but literally it's like, oh, new woman unlocked. Like,
or like, you know, the classic Mario rescuing the princess or anything like that. Or
culture up to like 2015. Whole culture. Give or take a year or two.
Yeah.
Oh, somewhere in this, we skipped over maybe my favorite running gag in the whole show. When Jay's trying to get out of going to the debutante ball, he makes up his fake secretary, Ethel.
Oh, yes.
Oh, Ethel, what's on the docket for next Friday night?
That's the night you promised to take me to the Rainbow Room, where we'll dance to the sounds of Skip Martin and his orchestra.
It's just John Lovitz doing a falsetto secretary voice character. That it's just Jay talking. It's so fucking weird, and I love how how did this get on network television? This is the weirdest thing you've ever seen. Just Jay talking to his made up high pitched falsetto secretary. I love it, and it's just so like. This is like literally a crazy person doing a crazy person thing on television.
Jay will occasionally just have these like flights of fancy where he goes off on a crazy tangent or like gets wrapped up in a fantasy world or something.
Yeah. But that one, they did that a few times, and it never doesn't make me burst out laughing when it's just Jay talking to Ethel.
Yeah.
His made up secretary. I'm like, you can afford a secretary. I think a character just likes having this Ethel character.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So Jay meets this woman in the buffet line. They make plans to go dance under the blue whale later. And then we get this awesome musical number, quickly before that, we learned that the that this debutante ball is to benefit people with massive head injuries.
That was a great. I mean, any joke where you can point out how bullshit rich people's charities are is always good.
Yeah, and that kind of pays off in the other very dark joke of this episode where they're like,
And now our special guests will go back to the massive head injury fun room.
And it's just a dark closet.
yeah, they just put them in there and they shut the lights off, and it's like, my God.
I don't know if there's any air holes in that room.
Yeah. Well, there's like one window with like shades that are cracked open, and like a street light is shining in through, which just makes it look like so much more squalid.
I love that joke. It's like it that is a punch-up joke, even though and I don't think the laughter comes from like the moaning of the people with the head injury. It's just like rich people are fucking terrible is the point of that joke, and it holds up 100% for me.
Yeah, but in between these two beats with the people with massive head injuries, we get this musical number that the debutantes sing. I think I'm going out of my head.
Well, I think I'm going out of my head. Yes, I think I'm going out of my head over you.
I was actually taken aback by just how well produced the music was.
Yeah.
Like, it sounds so good.
It was still Alf Clausen who did. I saw in the credits that Alf Clausen, who did all the Simpsons music, also did the music for the Critic. And the theme for the Critic was composed by Hans Zimmer, which is crazy to me. Like, that's insane.
Like, this was after Crimson Tide. Like, how could they afford him?
I don't know. It was ABC money. That's but yeah, no, it was like it. They had music, like Simpsons music was always very well produced, and it was mainly Alf Clausen, and so they had him do that too. So it's just like always spot on with that.
So we get to this moment where Margot makes this grand speech where she's going to rail against the the whole idea of debutante balls. She says it makes her sick, that it's a pointless waste of money. Though I thought we would get maybe some sort of feminist angle, because earlier in the episode she says they're sexist, but then nothing about that in this speech that she gives here.
It's just that they're offensive. There's no real feminism in that speech. I mean, I guess the feminism is in the gesture of giving a speech decrying it, but nothing specifically is addressed.
Yeah. Like, they really don't get into how patriarchal it is or anything like that. So yeah, I mean, I guess, the Critic in general, I think, is not great as far as like female characters and like feminist plots and stuff are concerned. This is probably the most feminist the show ever gets. Yeah,
there's like a couple of moments, like when they develop Doris, there's a couple of moments where you're like, oh shit, but not really. The second season when they have the love interest in the daughter, like
Alice.
That was clearly introduced to like make him a human being more than like he was in the first season. But it was like, I feel like she was a good character, but she was still like a character serving in the interest of the male character.
Yeah. Although I do really love her character. She really, I think, makes the show better.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So after Margot gives this speech, two guards, Betty and Veronica, i.e. just like, giant bodyguard men in dresses.
The Nixon thugs. Yeah, they're just Nixon. What were Nixon's thugs? They're that, but in dresses.
Yeah.
Or just two mob goons or whatever.
They take her off stage, and Jay says that he liked the speech and all this, but like, yeah, it doesn't really feel like Margot won or that she really accomplished anything in the end, which is.
And then she like feels bad that no boys wanted to dance with her still too. And then
that's weird too. And the end of her arc is that the limo driver says, "Oh, guess what? I'm also a bartender." I
was wondering, is that a Roadhouse reference? I was thinking,
I don't know.
The character had like a Swayze look, so I was wondering if it was like technically. I'm wondering if it was a Roadhouse reference. I don't think it was, but I was just like,
I don't know, because Patrick Swayze was not a bartender in that movie.
Yeah, I know, but it was just like at a bar. I felt like it was some kind of. I was like, is that a Swayze thing? I don't know.
I don't know. It just felt like a very weird end to that arc. It was just she gets to dance with a guy who turns out to be cool because he has long hair and is a bartender.
There were so many Brooklyn accents in that movie, in this show, and that was like a slick New York Brooklyn accent. I feel like that had to have been a parody of something. I just don't know what it was a parody of specifically.
Yeah, I don't know, because even if it was Roadhouse, I mean, Roadhouse was like in the 80s, so
yeah, it definitely felt like I am missing the thing you're parodying here, but
yeah,
I don't know.
Don't get it.
Or it just could have been a choice. I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a joke I want to go back to because it's sort of apropos in terms of what's come out in culture lately, where the reason the woman is attracted to him, I'll spoil it. Is that she is the hippo, the person behind the hippo costume. And earlier in the episode, Jay is with his son and goes to see a book reading of the hippo and calls her out, gives her this whole "you're the worst thing about culture" monologue.
You are an insipid walking commercial, and your cereal turned my urine pink.
Well, you have to eat 6 bowls for that to happen.
Yes, and a gallon of chocolate milk. But that's not the point.
Which is why the hippo lady ends up being attracted to him. Sure, why not?
That feels very doesn't that happen in the newsroom a bunch?
Yeah.
Like Jeff Newsroom chews out some woman who then sleeps with him. Yeah. I don't know. I haven't actually watched the newsroom, but
his name is Jeff Newsroom. Yeah. That is his character's name. That is his Christian name. There's also a line in that where it goes, "This is like the time you cold cock Mr. Rogers," which is a joke that made me laugh so hard.
Yeah, the crowd of kids that have come to see Humphrey and his in-store appearance turn on Jay and Marty and bum rush them. So apparently Jay just has a history with antagonizing
violence of beloved children's entertainment figures.
Yeah. So then, we do get that scene where it's revealed that this woman that Jay has been flirting with all night and is about to sleep with is the woman inside the Humphrey suit. Also a weird end to the B plot, because like the way we're introduced to Humphrey is that he's stealing Jay's ratings, and like they sleep together, and then that doesn't really solve the problem.
But actually, in the next episode, I was watching a few episodes today, and which is not hard for me to do. But in the next episode, Jay's ratings plummet so much that he gets canceled. So it did kind of set up the next episode, which is that Jay's job is in jeopardy and his ratings are falling.
Yeah.
So it didn't answer that, but it did kind of set up the next episode. It's hard to think of like Simpsons or Critic episodes like coming in sequence. Like it's you don't think of them that often. I'm like, oh, if you're establishing that Jay's show gets shitty ratings, I'm okay with that B plot not really going anywhere because it did establish that he is getting shitty ratings. So
yeah, and the Humphrey character will actually come back. In the series. Yeah, so I think that just about brings us to the end of the episode. The last thing we get is this weird coda where Jay comes out and addresses the audience directly.
Yes.
There's this weird little coda where Jay comes out and he says, "Please do not give away the horrifying twist in this episode," which I guess he's referring to the fact that the woman is Humphrey the hippo.
Or there was some line at the very end of the episode there was some like weird moment.
Oh, the limo driver says he once drove some obscure actor who is dead now.
James Coco.
James Coco. Do you know who James Coco is?
I don't know, but I also know they shout on him in The Simpsons too, in the Treehouse of Horror episode where Homer goes to hell, and they force feed him donuts, and he loves it. They say James Coco went mad after 5 minutes. Like that's so. Okay. So that he was like I looked him up like at some point, because I was like, oh, they did joke about him twice. He was just like a fat guy in movies in the 80s, or maybe like a TV show. He was like famous for that.
Yeah, that's sadly becoming another trend on this show, is me not doing research. Yeah, so then the very last moment of this episode, Duke Phillips comes back out and they repeat the Pillsbury Doughboy joke.
Yes.
Good callback.
Yes. Because they only did it 4 times the first time, so you need to do it at least one more time.
Yeah.
It was one of those. This show was also the master of like, let's repeat a joke until it stops being funny and then it's funny again.
Yeah.
Like that trope in comedy, I feel like this show was way ahead of the curve on that.
Yeah, we're going to get that later in another episode where they do.
I think I know the Franklin moment.
Oh, I was not thinking of the Franklin moment. I was thinking of when they do the JFK movie parody.
Oh yeah, the JFK movie parody
with like they say like 2 hours of additional footage.
And it's back into the left.
Yeah,
just Kevin Costner repeating that for 2 hours. No, I was thinking, and I don't want to spoil future episodes, but the moment when it's a Home Improvement parody and Franklin's talking to Wilson, who's just a scarecrow instead of a human being, and there's a bird on it. It says, "Who? My wife Eleanor. Who? My wife," and it just goes on until it can't go on anymore. But like that show is the master of repeating a joke until it got even funnier than it was the first time.
So that brings us to the end credits. We get the running gag at the very end where the usher comes in and Jay says, "Get away, zit face,"
which is my least favorite of all the post-credit gags they have.
Yeah, that's also maybe the first time it's repeated because that was used in the pilot episode.
Yeah, my favorite one is, "Sir, the movie's over, but I have nowhere to go." That's by far my favorite of all of them.
Though I'm a little disappointed they didn't come up with a unique one for each episode.
Well, it's kind of. I think they're kind of going for like couch gags, where the couch gags would repeat every so often in The Simpsons.
But for a long time, there were different couch gags, and and Bart wrote something different on the chalkboard every episode.
Yeah. And they do in the intro. The phone call he gets when he starts is always great. That joke's always good. This one was like, I get one of the weaker ones where Doris is at the morgue and she has to convince the coroner that she's not dead, which is like. Yeah. All right, but there's
like they joke about her age the same way they joke about Jay's weight.
My favorite one though is it's when Jay picks up the phone and it's Jay's voice and it says, "Jay, this is your inner child. I just escaped and robbed a liquor store." I've repeated that line so many times. Like you wake up drunk, you're like, "What did I do last night? I robbed a liquor store."
Oh, amazing!
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that brings us to the end of the episode. Was there anything we missed or anything else from this episode you wanted to talk about?
No, except I may be confusing because once I watch one episode of the show, I tend to watch 5. So I think that I will watch one episode, then I watch like 3 or 4 more afterwards. So I'm like, I don't want to give away a joke from another episode because I'm like, I think this was in it, because all I'm going to say is that I've lived in LA now almost 7 years. And the best thing I've seen in all these 7 years was Maurice LaMarche live doing his Orson Welles Peas ad.
Oh, hell yeah.
I was at a Simpsons trivia thing at the now departed Meltdown. And he came to give a speech and someone asked, "Hey, can you do frozen peas?" And he did it. And I died.
Oh, that's great.
It was, to me, that is like, this is why I moved to LA, because shit like this can happen.
Yes.
So it's a man doing an impression of a man doing a peas ad, and it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to me.
That's amazing. My favorite thing that maybe ever happened at Meltdown I wasn't there for this, but I did see a video of it. They had a Mr. Show art show where, a bunch of like paintings and stuff based on like Mr. Show sketches and characters. And someone recreated the thimble collection from the Mount Everest sketch.
Yes, did people topple over it?
Jay Johnston himself toppled over it.
I was hoping as soon as you said the art thing, I'm like, please tell me they built that. Yes. So I'm very happy that's
the best possible thing happened.
I'm like, please tell me that. Yes, that's great.
Oh, man. Cool. So I guess that's going to do it for this episode. Ethan, anything you want to plug?
Who knows what is a thing anymore? I guess follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Ethan Stan Comedy. You can also follow my sketch team. We still are releasing videos and we're doing some other things. We have been doing live shows monthly. Obviously, that's not the case now, but we're still releasing content. We're figuring out the next step, but it's Night Church. You can find us on all platforms at Hail Night Church.
Very funny team.
We love each other very much, and whatever form our team takes in the future, we're hoping it will be wonderful. And you can find all our content and just say nice things about us, which is good for our ego, if nothing else.
Yes, I've known a lot of the guys on Night Church for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
You are all awesome, very funny people.
We also did a Simpsons sketch on our team. I don't know if you saw that one. It was because Vanessa Gritton, who's on our team, does a perfect Bart Simpson voice, and it's uncanny how perfect her voice is for that. And so we just did the "Why you little choke" thing, and then there was a little neck snap, and no, written by Dane Bowling. So that was we've done Simpsons parody there as well. So yes.
Awesome. Cool. So yeah, definitely check out Night Church on all the socials. And find Ethan on all the socials because he's also a very funny man. Ethan, thank you so much for joining me on this episode.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right. And we will see you guys next time for the next episode of It Stinks. Thank you for listening to this episode of It Stinks, the Critic podcast. I'm your host, Brian Rubinow. Our theme song is by Brandon Beck. You can email the podcast at itstinkspod@gmail.com and find us on Twitter and Instagram at itstinkspod.